Welcome back, Rocky Road family. We have a new guest today. I'm really excited for what I feel like will be a very rich conversation with three mental health professionals who have all been through some stuff. So our new guest today, please introduce yourself. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm Shannon Swanson, and I am a therapist. Was a therapist, worked in mental health for 20 years. I'm kind of actually getting back into it a little bit. I am also a health coach and combined my current experience over the last 3 years with both my being a therapist and a health coach. And now I help women going through changes in their life and looking at the stories they tell themselves that tend to limit them. Yeah.
Yeah, we all have limiting beliefs about ourselves, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Let's start with the last 3 years. You had just mentioned that as far as like what happened in the last 3 years to lead you to where you're at now.
Well, like I said, I had been working in mental health for 20 years, was a therapist, worked in something called psychiatric day treatment, and then became a director. And at the end of my career was the quality assurance director, which I have to say is not what brought me to the field. And so I was quite miserable, to be honest. It had some benefits, but I wasn't happy. And, I was also in a marriage at that point for about 20 years. And everything kind of happened, interestingly, all at once, which I feel is happening to a lot of people over the last 3 years. So many upheavals and life changes. And so it started with exiting my job. Prior to that, I'd had issues with my thyroid and went to the doctor and discovered that I had hypothyroidism. That sent me on kind of another tangent journey where I ended up becoming a health coach because I was able to heal myself and not have to go on medications. That's a whole other story. So I was trying to build my business while I was doing that full time and just was really burnout. And I ended up leaving that job and started building my business. And then COVID hit. And then started to kind of, I think one big piece that happens with relationships is that and just in life in general, we get so distracted by everything going around us, raising children, working, one day just leads into the next. And so your life is just kind of passing you by. And you have like this little voice, I think, always in the back of your head saying, this isn't right, or this isn't working, or you need to change direction. And we tend to avoid and not listen. And I wasn't listening, but now the voices are louder because I'm not as distracted. And so I had known for a long time that my marriage was no longer working. I think we both did, and just was in denial, focused on my career, raising my daughter, and things just started to fall apart. And we decided that we needed to separate. So I was going through that. At the same time, I had some events that, I've always been religious. Spiritual, I would say. I was raised Catholic, but was no longer a part of that, but very spiritual. God has been a huge piece of my life, and had some things happen to me to, I would say, become more awake into my own path, and started to have just all of these things. My life just kind of did a 180. All of the things that were no longer working were kind of systematically removed in a way, I guess. And then to bring in new things where I started to meet new people. My business has shifted. So I started my biggest focus was on health and healing. I got a specialization in hormone health, and I hired some people to help me with the marketing and launching, and it just wasn't working. I wasn't into it. It didn't feel right. And so I just thought, what is it? I had to take some time to really get honest with myself and say, what is the common thread in everything that you've done in your life? And what's your passion? And it's to help people believe in themselves again. Because one thing that I mention often that still sticks with me, and I think it's true of all of us, when I worked with kids, one of the first questions I would ask them in a session, the first session is, why do you think you're here? Why do you think you have to have therapy and meet with a therapist? And they would say, because I'm bad. And that always really just struck me in terms of part of the work that I believe we needed to do, and that it kind of carries on today working with women, is that all of the stories that have been created through our experiences have created these stories of unworthiness and not believing in ourselves, not thinking we're good enough. And that's what we tend to hang on to. And we
Mm.
just dismiss the good. And so it's really helping people shift their perspective in terms of what are those stories and are they really true? They're not. And who are you really? You're a soul having a human experience. So that's kind of where I'm at today.
I like when you were talking about the change of your life more so like all this old life, these past things were all these doors were closing and then all these new doors were opening. And you just had this big, huge revolve of yourself. And I feel like for me, I went through a period of that over the last year and I'm still kind of in that right now, I would say too. But it is a really unique thing where everything that you knew and everything that was comfortable for you all of a sudden was not there anymore. And that can be very limiting. It can be a very scary place for a lot of people too.
Yes, very much so. It's very disconcerting. And I think it's happening with a lot of people. I think there's just a lot of changes. And I always think of like the collective consciousness, the energy, just in general for all of us, that we're all connected. It's happening to everyone that I know. And I think a lot of people don't really understand what's happening. So if they're not connected to God, they don't have a relationship, a spiritual relationship, this is my opinion, that there's going to be all these changes and they don't really know why. They don't understand and can think, have I done something, go very much into this why place, why me, why is this happening, where I would encourage people. And I know for me, it's always been, okay, what are you trying to tell me?
Mm.
What's the lesson here? What do you want me to learn? Because I think that's why we're here, is to remember who we are, that we are of the divine, we are a part of God, and we are here for a purpose, to share our gifts with the world, to help each other, to learn, to teach, learn from each other, and through relationship, which I think is so important. And so for me, it's what's helped me is to stop saying, why is this happening to me? And instead the question is, okay, what am I supposed to learn? Because this is for my growth as a human.
Mm.
Mm.
Mm. Mandy and I talk a lot about how it's difficult in those moments to say what is the lesson here, because when you're in the middle of it, that's the last question that you want to ask yourself, is say, okay, I trust you. I don't like it right now, but I trust what you're doing and I hope that I will see that come to fruition. So, what's one of those scenarios that you had to ask yourself, what's the lesson in this, when you didn't believe there was actually a lesson?
Well, not to get too much into it, but it was around the time that my marriage was falling apart, and I started having a lot of panic attacks, and my anxiety through the roof. And I feel like people come into your life for a reason, to be a catalyst. And I had someone come into my life to kind of wake me up to my reality and what was happening. And it was, and trust me, I was very much in it. And I always say I was in the abyss. Really had moments where I remember being upstairs in my house and looking out the window and thinking, I don't know if I want to be here anymore. This isn't working for me. And I just had this moment where my life just lost meaning. And I have a daughter and she's wonderful. And I would never say that I was ever thinking of ending my life. It wasn't a thought in my mind. It wasn't so much that I wanted to not be here anymore. But at the same time, I think I was in so much pain. It's like, I just don't want to do this anymore. And so I think it was actually, quite honestly, and it's something that I teach now in my membership and with my clients through coaching, is we've been taught, I think, through the culture that we live in and just in general, to not feel anything. We're taught avoidance, distraction. And I think for me, it was, I had to learn to just feel everything. Stop running from yourself. Stop running from yourself. And before I could ask that question, I had to feel everything. I had to feel it all, allow myself to purge, feel it all. and then started to think out, but I've always kind of been that way. I was that way at the beginning of this 3 years. It was, okay, what is the universe trying to tell me? But I think you have to allow yourself to feel it first, give yourself that space, that grace. And then you can start to ask that question. Okay, what am I supposed to learn here? And I think it can be a hard question to get to, but I think it's really important, because otherwise you stay in kind of a victim place, which doesn't
Mm.
serve you, doesn't get you anywhere. And you deserve more than that.
What would be some of your tips to have somebody help to feel that? Because I think when people hit that
Mm.
point where they don't want to be in this way anymore, they don't really know how to even feel those emotions. So what are some practical steps that somebody could take that leads them to feel that way?
Honestly, it's to just stop, pause, and if you're not sure how to do that, I would say definitely get support from other people to help you do that.
Mhm.
Um,
Sure.
so you're not alone.
Mhm.
And some people do have to go through it alone, unfortunately. And for me, I think I had the fortunate background of being a therapist, even though it's funny that you can be a therapist and still not see your life.
Oh yeah,
um,
absolutely.
it doesn't apply to you when you are one. Um, However, I think for me, I had such a strong spiritual foundation. That was part of it too, that I was able to, I don't even know how to explain this. I think it's just a journey in terms of the healing. I think that we think of it as very linear, that I start at
Mhm.
A and then I end at D, when really it's kind of all over the place. You come in and out of
Mhm.
it. You do ask the question, why me? And then you do, and then you purge a little more and feel a little more, and then you come back to, you get triggered again. Okay, why me? And then you ask the question. So I think it's very much 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And so, to be really practical, I would say to people, learn how to meditate, be in nature truly. And it sounds woo, but it's really the truth.
Mhm.
Where you just give yourself that space to just sit in quiet, if at all possible. And that's all you have to do. And when something comes up and you are triggered and you feel like you want to cry, just cry. Allow
Mhm.
that energy to just come out of you. It's so, so important, because I think what happens with people is when we feel that pain and we're really in it and we're really in that, place of despair, we will tell ourselves, this, I'm never going to come out of this. This is never going to change. Um,
Mhm.
I, if I go there, then I'm not going to be able to find my way out. When really
Mhm.
it's the opposite. If you allow yourself to feel it, because all emotions really are just energy, and they need to just be purged and to be acknowledged. And I think that's such
Mhm.
a big piece, is to just feel it, just stop and feel it, and allow yourself to
Mhm.
cry, allow it to all come out. And I know that as I have practiced that, I feel much better, because I've
Mhm.
realized all of that. So, but it's definitely a process where I think, we have to also, a big thing I talk about is allow ourselves to be human and normalize the humanness of feeling all of these things and going through the process. And it's different for everyone. But that's
Mhm.
the most practical advice I can say. And if it is hard for you, obviously, we know as mental health professionals that if you cannot do that on your own, obviously seek support for sure.
Mhm. I don't know that I've ever had an occasion where I don't allow myself to cry. It just comes out.
Mhm.
I was told as a child that I cried too much, and I think that probably benefited me. I probably just had a lot of stress in my little body. So, we talked today also about the champagne bottle analogy, whereas if you let things build up in your body, what you're going to do is you're basically shaking that champagne bottle, and no matter what, that cork is going to come off at some point, whether you want to or not. And so, being able to
Mhm.
self-regulate and being able to have your awareness about what you need to be able to pause. Some people don't even have the awareness that they do need that support. They know that they're struggling with something, but having the awareness that there's someone, or the belief that someone has the ability to help them, is what a lot of people struggle with.
Yes.
Have you ever had someone walk into your office well, I'm sure the answer is yes, but I'm more curious about how you handled this. But someone who walks into their office or your office and you know that they do not have the self-awareness of what's going on and what their needs are, and they're there because they're either court mandated to, or their parent told them to, or their spouse told them that they had to get therapy or they would be left, and how to help someone build awareness when they've got a big concrete wall around them.
Mm-hmm. I think when I worked with kids, oftentimes it was just allowing them to share their story, and it really depended upon their age. So with little ones, it's through play therapy, which is a completely different experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's done through play and asking questions and just hearing kind of where they're at and what their own perception is of their reality. But with older kids, it's just, allowing them to tell their story, come at it from a different place, and building the relationship, I think, is huge, as you both know. But I would say it's just through, because I think one thing that's really impactful, and I've said this before, is that for anyone, if you're wondering what's happening with yourself, if you are in a place where you're not sure what's going on, talk to yourself out loud. And it can sound silly, but it's somehow there's something to do with the act of hearing ourselves, which where we can get a lot of aha moments. But I would say it's just a lot of what I practiced when I was working with children was narrative therapy, which is looking at the story and helping them understand that. Let me go back. I think one of the biggest pieces I did as a therapist, when they weren't able to put things to words, when they weren't really sure what was going on, was to say and ask for permission, hey, do you think it would be okay for me to take a guess as to what possibly is going on for you, what you're feeling and thinking, particularly with children who've been sexually abused? And I would go through this whole thing around how it wasn't their fault and the reasons why, and talk about the emotions they possibly could have been feeling and what has resulted in the story now that they tell themselves. And oftentimes just the act of doing that, when they weren't able to really talk about it and weren't able to put everything they were feeling into words, they would just relax in front of me and just go, oh, like someone understands, someone gets it, and I don't have to say it. Yeah. Big. It was always big.
So often we try to put words to the way that we're feeling and we aren't able to, even as mental health professionals, just as humans in general. Sometimes it's helpful to have somebody else figure out, you can almost like word vomit everything that you're feeling, and then somebody else can pick all of that up and put it together into a streamlined sentence or a feeling or something. And that's where I think it's so important to have that community and that support of somebody else to listen and walk you through those feelings. But I really liked what you said, going back a little bit to saying things out loud, because we live in this world where everything is like, oh, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking. And people just are afraid to say things out loud. But you can do that alone. You can be in the bathroom, you can be in your closet and say something out loud and find that helps you process and get things out. And, I find that even with journaling, like writing things out so I can visually see what's being said in my mind. And that just goes into anything, making your to-do list. It's so much shorter than what your brain is telling you that it is, because your brain is all over the place. But being able to not be afraid to say something out loud is just really important. I like what you said, that it helps people process and get to a better place and a healthier place. If you don't have that support specifically too.
Yes, I do it often. And, it's every time, and literally every time I've done it, where I'm just sitting and I'm contemplating and thinking of something in my life, and I start talking about it out loud and thinking about it and talking, and literally the act of hearing myself, that's when I have my aha moments. And it's literally every single time. It's so amazing. It's such a simple thing to do, but so effective.
Yeah.
I've had experiences recently where I'm going through a couple of different changes in relationships and me being able to make boundaries for certain relationships. And I'll actually kind of rehearse the conversation I have with that person out loud in my car. And I imagine their different reactions. And I think that you're right. It's as if I actually have the conversation with that person. And then sometimes it feels like I had that conversation with that person. And I'm mentally in a better place because I thought of, this is what they could possibly say. This is the best case. This is the worst case. Do I still really need to address this, or is their awareness too low for this conversation to even happen about our relationships? And so I think if more people would do that, we would have less of this, that inner conflict, the tension with, do I say this? Do I not say this? Well, try it out with yourself in the car. I've been in the middle. My husband thinks I'm nuts sometimes. I've been in the middle of a conversation with him in the car, and sometimes we'll have a lull and we'll just not talk for a few seconds. And I will say something out loud that I'm thinking, and he goes, "What?" I go, "I'm sorry. I was just, I was just in another planet right now." Being able to process your own stuff. I was told early on when I was in grad school that usually people approach the mental health field because of an experience, either positive or negative, that they had in the mental health field as they were growing up or in their young adulthood. There's some sort of reason that they feel drawn to the work that they do. So I'm curious, what's your catalyst? You talk a lot about kids. What was your catalyst for supporting children in the way that you do?
Well, it's interesting you should ask, because I was always really interested. I thought I was going to be an interior designer, and the universe. I always believe that the universe, God, the divine, whatever you call that, is always knocking on the door and saying, "No, go this direction." And so I had two roommates who, one was diagnosed at the time back then with manic depression, which we now know as bipolar disorder. And I had an experience with her where she had asked me to go to where my reaction to what was happening, I was very calm. And I don't know how or why I was, but she said, "Can you come to me with my appointment with my psychiatrist?" And I said, "Sure." And I still remember the doctor saying to me, and it's really the only memory I have of the situation, where they said to me, you handled this perfectly. You didn't overreact or underreact. And at the time, I'm 19. I'm like, okay, whatever. But I always had an interest in psychology and the way people worked, but I never connected it to my childhood, ever, not once. I just thought that was something I was interested in. And so I majored in psychology. I got an associate's degree also in criminal justice. And with that, I had to do an internship. I didn't want to go into law enforcement. So they said, "You can do your internship at the juvenile justice center that we have here." And started, because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with it. And started working with those kids and fell in love working with children, and then worked in the juvenile justice system at a residential facility for years, and then ended up becoming a therapist, and then which led me to working with children, where at the agency I was at for 20 years. But what's interesting, really, really interesting, is I think that a lot of us who do go into this field, whether consciously or unconsciously, it has something to do with something we've been through that we want to either understand, but also help others because we understand it. And for me, I think it was very unconscious. Like I really hadn't connected it yet. And it wasn't until I was through events with my family, we are estranged right now, that I realized I suffered a lot of emotional abuse. And my mother has some serious mental health issues, and didn't really realize that how much that affected me until recently in my life, which is also very interesting, that I had this entire career as a therapist and never was connecting the dots. It wasn't clicking until some events happened, and I started looking into it and looked up narcissism. And when I read narcissism and how they behave, I was like, oh my gosh, this is me. This is me as a child. And one thing you were talking about just now when I was listening to you, a thought that I had is, one thing that I think a lot of people experience growing up in homes where you have parents who are emotionally unstable or who are very chaotic emotionally, and where your emotions as a child are not validated, you grow up as an adult constantly questioning yourself. And I still do that to this day. So when something happens to me, or I have an issue through relationship with someone where I have an emotional response, I literally it's a struggle for me still to really trust what I'm feeling. And so I will have to go check it out with someone and go, okay, is this reasonable for me to feel this way still? And now I'm now understanding that that has everything to do with what happened to me in my childhood.
Mm. We had someone on quite a while ago, but she has a daughter, and we were talking about the effects that parents have on their kids, and she goes, "I'm trying my best, but I don't even know what I'm doing right now that might possibly affect her in adulthood." And it's so interesting that even in, I feel like generationally, awareness and emotional acceptance of even just going to therapy and having mental health disorders and just generalized anxiety is more accepted. But now, are we hyper aware, right? And is our hyper awareness also going to affect our kids? So are we swinging the pendulum one way or another? We might not know until 2050, and see how these kids look in the workforce. And it's always really interesting to say, we like to think that every person is doing their best to care for the person around them, and maybe their best wasn't even equipped properly because the person who cared for them was doing their best and was ill-equipped. And it's not necessarily, sometimes it obviously, if there's abuse and drug use and other contextual issues, obviously that's some things that, yes, is a negative effect on the child. But a lot of times the parents are just doing their darn best.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting to see, because again, I've worked with kids in an adolescent psych setting as well,
Mm.
and to see the parents come in, and some of them, they go, "I don't know what happened. Is it me?" And then other parents say to the kids, "Look what you did."
Yes.
And it's so fascinating just to see the differences and the different parenting styles.
Yeah, it's like very much I've experienced that. Like fix the kid, please. Just fix them. And it's like
Mhm.
you have a part of this. We all play. And to me, it's very much, it's not, for me, with when I work with people, it's not about judging yourself. We need to stop the judgment and start normalizing our humanness and being here, and that every single one of us has some kind of traumatic background inside. Because I think people think of trauma as some kind of catastrophic event, which is true, which that is definitely true. But there's also complex trauma, which is
Mm.
something that are small things that happen over time that we may overlook, which definitely impacted us in a huge way. So I think it's the one thing I will say with my parenting with my daughter is that two big things for me have always been one, that I've talked to her about is one, always acknowledging her emotions and normalizing her emotions for her, and that
Mhm.
it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling and to support her and be there and listen to her, but also teaching her, and I've told her this many times, um, because it's something that I couldn't do with my mom. And I said, now, even though you have had a good childhood and we're very close, you will at some point, as you grow up and become an adult, you're going to start to have these moments where you're going to think, oh, this thing that happened with my mom impacted me in this way. And I said, and I
Mm.
always want you to know that you will always be able to come to me and ask questions and say, hey, this thing that happened affected me in this way. And I want you to know I will always listen, and I will never not, I will always be open to that, because I think that is so important. But I do agree that a lot of parents don't understand, because and especially for me, I'm 55, and my parents, in that generation, you didn't go to therapy. It
Right.
wasn't something people did. It was very much this mentality of, you suck it up, you deal with whatever's put in front of you, and you move on. And
Mhm.
unfortunately for some, they aren't able and weren't given the tools to face their own traumas in their own childhood. And I agree, do the best that they could. And so I think for people like me, it's being able to have boundaries with those parents, whatever that looks like for you, but also forgiving them and understanding, and trying to access your own empathy for yourself, what they must have gone through to
Mhm.
to have acted or made the choices they did when they parented you. For sure, it's so important.
Yeah, I think, and kind of what Kristin was saying earlier with that balance where we're going into this hyper awareness because of social media and everything is like, do this, do this, do this. And if you don't, your child's going to be so messed up. So now we're almost trying to paint this picture where we are responsible because we have access to all these tools and tips that we need to parent the perfect children. But
Yeah.
like you said, realizing that we are going to have moments where we need to open our hands out and just let them know. The same guest that Kristin was talking about, she's like, yeah, I'm keeping a journal to give to her therapist one day. Like, and just this is what I did. This is what happened. This is what was going on in her life. And just really having that, like you said, your humanness that I'm also a parent. And so I feel like I need to protect my daughter all the time. And I'm always trying to just do the best, the best, the best, the best, the best, only realizing that my best is never going to be good enough because I'm not capable of doing everything perfectly and everything right. And so I need to have that loose grip where I'm going to do the best that I can given the circumstances that I'm given. And then when she's 18, 20, 25, encouraging her, hey, you need to go and undo all the things that I put in you that may not be good because I just did that unintentionally, the best thing that I could at the time,
Mhm.
and given the resources that I'm given. And I think we learn too, for you as a parent, where you're at is very different than where I'm as a parent. And then trying to be better than our own parents, we're really
Right.
just critical of ourselves and putting ourselves down. And then yet having these high expectations on our kids because we are mental health professionals or we've researched this or we have this to back us up. And it really is this just never ending balance where you're trying to find you don't want to be a perfectionist, but you also want to do the best that you possibly can.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things for me, because I really believe that you were given the parents that you were given for a purpose, for a reason, for lessons you needed to learn while you were here in this lifetime. I totally believe that. And I believe that's true for her, obviously, in our relationship. But it's always been me wanting to always keep the lines of communication open. I think that's really, really big. And I
Mhm.
think just allowing them to have their emotions, that it has nothing to do with you. It's not a reflection of you. And I think why that was so important to me was because I wasn't allowed to have them as a child. I was told I was insane when I was just 14 and being, going developmentally through being a teenager, and things like that. And really, at the end of the day, it was because my mother's anxiety could not tolerate my emotions. It wasn't that she didn't want me to feel anything. I mean, there is a reason. But yeah, I think one thing that we have to forgive ourselves for or give ourselves grace for is the fact that we only know, because I think what happens is like we get to our future selves and then we blame our past selves for all the things that we did. But it's like, yeah,
Mhm.
but you only knew what you knew then. You only
Mhm.
had what you knew to work with. And I
Mhm.
think for our kids is doing the best that we can. And I think what's the most helpful thing for me to have arrived at when I became a parent was always letting my kid know that I'm human, that I don't expect her to be perfect. I am not perfect. We're human. I'm going to make mistakes, but having the wherewithal for me as a parent to be able to communicate and talk to her and say, hey, I'm sorry this happened. This is why it's happening for me. But
Mhm.
just having that respect for her as my daughter, that I've never been come from this place of, I'm the parent, I know the best, you have to do it this way. That's just not my style of parenting. But I've always been huge on the communication always being open, always, because if you
Mhm.
shut it down, then the times that they need you, they're not going to come talk to you. And
Right.
that's
Mm.
not, you don't want that.
Yeah,
Mm.
keeping the lines of communication open and the fear out of that and not allowing them to develop some kind of fear like, oh, if I say this to mom, something's going to happen. And that really continues going full circle back to healing ourselves and making
Right.
ourselves better people so that our children and friends and family can feel comfortable to come to us and that they know that we can self-regulate, we're self-aware, we can process things in a mature way in order to give them
Mm,
that comfort in knowing they can talk to us about anything.
right. Exactly. So important.
Mm. Well,
Hmm.
and you mentioned mistakes too, and there's also an aspect of if you are, if anybody knows that slightly creepy movie Stepford Wives, if you are on the external prim and proper and perfect, then when you try to help someone through something, they might not really have any stake and say, I don't think you understand what I'm going through. But if you, like you're saying, you are not a perfect parent, none of us are ever going to be, and you say to your daughter, I've made mistakes and I'm going to learn from them, then you can empower her to make her own mistakes and learn from them. Some mistakes are bigger
Exactly.
than others for sure. But
Mm.
and again, being a firm believer in God, I know that there has been some crap that's happened to Mandy, to myself, to you in our lives that has led us to the place where we are able to support people's healing. And when we were sitting, one of my favorite terms is sitting in the suck. When we were sitting in the middle of the suck, we weren't asking, to go back to our first comment, we weren't asking, what is the lesson? We were all probably asking, why? But now that we can retrospectively see the why, we can help other people to be more kind to themselves while they're making some of those mistakes that we have the capability to help them with.
100%. It's, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I just am such a firm believer that everything happens for a reason and always in our highest good. And that's what I always come back to. And even through my hardest days that were, I had days where it's like, okay, I'm getting up and I'm going to just try to get through the day. I always came back to, okay, I'm just going to surrender to God because I may not be able to see the bigger picture or where I'm going to land or where I'm going, but I do trust that that I'm being led, that I will always be guided 100%. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think for me personally, it's my spiritual foundation and my connection to God that has been the most important relationship of my life to help me through everything. But yeah, I agree. I've definitely, and it's funny because for me, I laugh because I always, to myself, think that God is just like, Shannon, how many times are you going to ask this question? And it's whenever I say, okay, what's the story here? I don't understand. Like, really? So what's this lesson all about? I always hear in my mind, but you chose this. You chose this. Your soul chose this
Mm-hmm.
before you. These are the lessons you learned. So always know you chose it. So that means you're strong enough to get through it. That you will never be given, what's that expression about God? You will never be given what you can't handle. I really, truly believe that 100%.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question about, it's more logistical in nature, but so you have an MSW, which for people who don't know what that is a master in social work, but you say you're also a coach. And so, but it seems like you're blending the two of those together so that they work compatibly. And those two worlds aren't always as compatible. Whereas some people think health coaching is not as useful in certain things. Some people think social work, how is that therapy? There's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, about what those two things are, first of all, and how they can work together. So in your work now, do you blend things together? Do you have a specific MSW life? Do you have a specific coaching life? Things like that. How do you manage that and help people in the way that's best for them?
Oh, so for me, I, at the heart of it for me, I was drawn to getting an MSW and doing social work. I think because in school, it's very much around self determination. And that's the one thing that I always was drawn to, the self determination. And, in terms of the Enneagram, I think one of you mentioned you were a 2. I am an 8. And so we're very much around, I want people to stand up for themselves. I want them to believe in themselves and fight for yourself. And you can do it, but I'm going to hold your hand. As a therapist, it's always been, no, you don't need me. I'm just here to reflect back to you how incredible you are and how strong you are and that you can get through anything and you can do this. I'm just holding your hand through it, but you don't need me. And so I was kind of drawn to being a therapist, I think, from that aspect. And what's interesting, you should ask that question because when I became a health coach, I was very much in the beginning drawn to it because I think when I went through my own healing my thyroid, I would talk to everyone who would listen about my story about how I healed. And I chose not to take medication and do it in a more natural way. And it worked for me. And so I thought, God, it would be great to work with people in this capacity and help them learn about physical health and that they can heal themselves. And natural means are absolutely 100% effective. And it's not woo. And so I just stumbled upon a health coach, went back to school. I went to the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. And then got an extended specialization in hormone health, and really thought that's what I wanted to do. And I think I was so burned out from the mental health system, particularly with the systems we work in, not from working with people. For me, it was the system, the foster care
Mm.
system, the managed care system in the state of Oregon that I live in. It's such a mess. And, I worked for a private nonprofit, so I'm working with people who have really been through it, who've been chewed up by the system, who are poor, who are really struggling. And so the system really beats the heck out of you when you work
Mm.
in that way as a therapist. And I was just fried, to be honest. And so when I left, I didn't want to talk about mental health. I thought that I would never come back to it. I'm like, I'm done with it. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I need a break. And I didn't realize how burnt
Mm.
out I was. And so then COVID hit. I have all this time where I'm at home. I'm able to kind of, regroup, I guess. Um, Prior to realizing my relationship was over, and I started to think about, because then I started focusing on, oh, I'm going to build this course on hormone health, and I'm going to do this, but I wasn't into it. I just found myself going this, I found myself in this state of resistance, and something was telling me, this is not your path, this is not what you're going to
Mm.
do. So I had to really dig in and go, okay, what's the common denominator, Shannon? Because then I started, it was like 2 years, about 2 years in after I left. And I started finding myself missing therapy, missing being in the room, helping people in that way. And because I find a lot of joy and truly, and it's going to sound so, I don't know the word, so woo, but it's really who I am. An honor to just be witness to people's stories and to help them
Mm.
through it in whatever way I can. Then I started to think, okay, you're an Enneagram 8. What are the big things of being an 8? What drew you to being a therapist, and what really drew you to being a health coach? It had nothing to do with the physical health and had everything to do with wanting people to know the truth that they can heal
Mm.
themselves. And so they all kind of to me, were very much interwoven, and I don't think an accident. And then with my own spiritual growth over the last 3 years and what I've been through, I've just kind of taken them all together to help people in that way. And so the way that I coach now is very much teaching women to find that place of self-awareness, uh, to normalize their experiences, that they are not their experiences. Those are stories. What has happened to you isn't who you are. And
Mm.
it's through this awareness, which I think is 90% of the battle. The more aware you are of your triggers and what comes up for you, your patterns of behavior, your thoughts, your choices, but doing so through the lens of no shame, no judgment, you can get curious about yourself. Like the more curious you can become about yourself, the more you discover, and you start to let go of those stories. I'm really not that story. That story was created by someone else about me, starting with my parents to friends
Mm.
to whatever experiences I've had, but it's not who I am. Um, to just really teach people to believe in themselves and to let go of all of that. But I weave in kind of the skills as a therapist in my coaching, but also with the spiritual.
That sounds spectacular. It's a beautiful picture. Like, I love the interwoven. I'm really seeing just all these little different colored threads just kind of working itself together. And the thing about that is that you have these different aspects and these different colored threads for each individual person too. So
Mhm.
one person might have a little bit more of that hormone. One person might really need that structure of the social work, coping skills worksheets and things like that. And so I think I agree, nothing's an accident. And the path that you've been on has led you to a place that you can really most effectively help other people. I can relate to that in a lot of ways. Um, I got a degree, didn't go to school for a few years, went back to school, got a job not in that degree, and like went kind of back and forth. And now I'm back full time doing music therapy, what I really do think that I was called to do. And I can very relate to. You can say people call it woo. It's a real thing, folks. Just being able to sit and when I'm playing and singing with people and they're really emoting and they're showing their true self, I am so humbled that I have the opportunity to witness that.
Yeah.
And it's such an amazing privilege to be honest. Just like with our guests, Mandy and I were talking today about how, wow, we certainly learn a lot from our guests. We just in these conversations with you, and I feel like Mandy and I talked a lot about a couple of these topics earlier today. So it's really cool that you're hitting on a lot of them with self-awareness. And I think if everybody had a little more self-awareness and everyone had a little less judgment and was a little more kind, I think people like us might be phased out eventually, because then everybody would be so much more supportive to each other.
Yes.
But
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's because we live in a world where there's so much shame constantly. We've got the cancel culture. So everyone's shamed into, there's no room for just being human and understanding that every one of us has trauma. Every one of us has had something to shape who we are now, that we are all human. We're doing the best that we can with where we're at. And if we just let go of so much of our own self-judgment and shame, and really, self-love is a big thing that I talk about too, because if you can come to that place of, to me, self-love is self-acceptance, that you accept yourself, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, and just understand that all of these experiences have shaped who you are now, and that you have gifts to share. Yeah, I was going to say something else and completely lost it. But just one thing I thought was interesting is I was doing some stuff for my membership around, because the month of February was all around self-love and self-acceptance. And I happened to look up self-love and Googled it. And when you look it up, you get all these, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm totally losing my train of thought. All of these results. And what do they say? Narcissism, self-centeredness, and all of these very words. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Yeah. And to me, it just was a reflection of the world we live in, that, it is selfish to put yourself first and to want to love yourself. And so we need to change that narrative, that, to me, when you get to a place of really truly loving yourself, knowing really who you are, that you are absolutely of the divine, you have gifts, you are here for a reason, and really accept yourself and stop judging yourself. When you give that to yourself, then your relationships change and your world changes, because now you can do that with others. And it's such a huge, huge thing.
And I think learning to love yourself doesn't mean that you become arrogant. And that's that balance where loving yourself knows you also know your weaknesses, and you're okay with that, and accepting your weaknesses and accepting your strengths, and knowing who you are from the core all the way through. And I know in the self-love world, where it comes out, it just becomes this very arrogant, me-centered place. But then it always, swings that pendulum, like we were talking about earlier, to this place where you just hate yourself. And that's not a place to live in either. And you don't want to be there. And I think one of the, I think going back to talking about us being like mental health professionals and just with everybody else that we're around, one of the most important things that I'm finding through our conversation and just in anything too, is where when you go through something, that you shouldn't put the expectation that it's the same for other people, or that the same response towards other people. So when we talk about the fact that we're with somebody and we're helping them, we're not giving them a step-to-step guide of, well, I went through a divorce too, so this is what you need to do next. It's more so helping in that partner to partner, shoulder to shoulder, face to face, where we're just listening and we're giving you the space to process. We're giving you maybe some tools and tips that can be helpful to get through certain things, but that we're not expecting you to be that same way. Exactly. And so having that gentleness as a coach, and having that, it's that balance of having the loyalty aspect of an Enneagram 8 to be like, you need to stand up for yourself, but then also being with that person and helping them to discover what that means, instead of just preaching at them or telling them, you need to do this. So it is this balance in life of self-love to self-deprecation, this balance of helping somebody, but being too bossy or being too specific with what we think that they need or should do. And, I think it comes down to people typically have a good heart that they're trying to really help somebody, but it can come across as just way too forceful, or the lack of self-awareness. They can just say something and you're like, that's not what I needed to hear, but it was coming from a good place. So just remembering that when we're here to help people and we're here to sit with people and walk them through difficult things, we just have more grace and more mercy for them and what they're going through. And then we just open our ears more than our mouths. And that to
Yeah.
just be a huge.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's really true because I think, we're living in this time of gurus, and all these gurus. And to me, it's like, you don't have to go outside of yourself to find the truth, to know who you are, that you might need someone to kind of mirror back and ask you questions to get you to start thinking and really help you look at your own story. But at the end of the day, you have the answers within you. You really do. And I am not and I totally agree with that I think in the field, this was my experience, that some people can get very much caught up in that they're the great white hope and I'm going to save these people and I am this therapist. And it's like, no, 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 no. No, you are just a blip on the screen. You are just a blip in their entire life. You're not that important. And I think that's important for me. It was always really important because it was more humbling that I am, and I really believe, like when you go back to what you were saying, being in the room with a client, that I always felt, and I really believe this, that when you feel that joy, I feel like God was always in the room. Like when I felt that feeling of really connecting with a human and allowing that safe place for them to share their experience and that trust in me to hold it and honor it, that's God, bringing humans together to help each other heal. And I think that's what we can do through relationship, regardless of whether it's therapeutic or not. But I totally agree with that 100%, that I am not here to save anyone. That's not my role. My role, I believe, and what I really talk about as a coach now, is to remind you of who you are. That you don't need me, but I'm going to remind you for a hot second of who you are. So then you can go, okay, I've got this. I don't need a coach anymore. I don't need a therapist anymore because I am what I need, and I know the power that I have.
Right. That's great. You've had a
One of-
wonderful conversation. Go ahead, Kristin. Did you have something else
I was
to say?
just gonna. This is just a personal thing. One of my best friends is an E8 too, and I just think I heard her voice come out of your mouth. You don't need me. I'm reminding you of how powerful. You know exactly who I'm talking about, Mandy.
Yeah.
that was really cool.
That's funny.
Yeah. We have had a great conversation, and so many things have come out of it. And I think the biggest thing that I see is that when we go through things, we open up those doors to help others because we've been through something. We've worked our way. We've gained the knowledge and the skills that we've needed when you put in the proper amount of work, and then you can be an asset to somebody else in their life. And I just feel like you have been a huge asset in this conversation of just really helping people to see that there is, you have your own answers. Like you said, that's really the core to what you were sharing. And so I really love that. So towards the end of our conversations, we always ask our guests about a song that they would like to add to our playlist. And our listeners can find our playlist on Spotify. It is very eclectic. So we would love to hear what kind of song either means something to you specifically, a season of your life, something that you really like right now. So tell us and share with us why you are choosing the song.
I will be honest with you, I had a really hard time coming up with a song because there's so many. And I would say that, give two answers. One, I think that something that's really helped me is listening to songs that have certain level of hertz. And I think 580 hertz is something that helps me. So the what is the word? The frequency of the music is very healing, and I do that through meditation. But in terms of just, pop music, what came to mind was Fleetwood Mac's "Don't Stop." I think that's the title of the song, isn't it? Just "Don't stop thinking about tomorrow." It will be. It'll be here better than before. Yesterday's gone. So that's the one that came to mind for me, is that always understand that. And I guess what it speaks to me is that whatever you're in right now, know that it's temporary, and there's always hope for something coming around the corner. And tomorrow's always a new day. I mean, it sounds so trite, but it's really the truth.
Yeah. Sometimes those cliche phrases are cliche for a reason. There is truth in it. So that's awesome. Fleetwood Mac would be great. Love them. That great band.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I think that was great. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really enjoyed our conversation and just our time together. All of our listeners can find more information about you and how to get connected with you in the show notes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and it'll be in the description on YouTube. So we just are really grateful for you. Thank you for your time and your energy and your just all of the things that you can give to us. And we're just grateful.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful too. It was such a good conversation. I absolutely loved it, because you never know where it's going to go sometimes. And I just thought this was great. And again, for a reason for the people listening. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So